Internet, it has been a wild week, y'alls, and there's a lot to talk about, and it's a beautiful day in Southern California. I got my smoke, I got my hat, I got my glasses, I got my Mr. Bungle shirt. Yeah. Those of y'all who know. Those of y'all who know. Y'all know about Mr. Bungle. And if you don't, you must learn, as KRS-One said. I know I'm ridiculous, okay? I know I'm ridiculous. So, first item of business today, someone who I've definitely always thought very highly of and kind of had a little bit of a secret crush on, Brianna Joy Gray, got the chance to interview your girl Marjorie Taylor Greene, and it's really her and Robbie. But let's watch some of that real quick.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you take a minute to explain why you supported this deal? Do you think it goes far enough in constraining government spending, something you and other conservative members of the Republican Party in the House have articulated is an important priority?
I really appreciate that question. Actually, of course, for me, nothing goes far enough. We're a nation and over $31 trillion in debt. And to me, that doesn't have one political party on it. It has both political parties on it because it took us decades to get to this point.
Kudos to her for admitting that.
But it was really the most recent year's spending that has pushed us completely out of control. And none of us here ever wanted
AKA, it's all Biden's fault, of course,
to be put in a position to raise the debt ceiling. But the reason why I was able to support this bill and excited to get behind it is because we cut $4.8 trillion in spending. And as a fiscal concern...
Okay, right out the gate, that's a tell. Because who in America that works for a living is like, their primary concern is cutting spending, maybe military spending, but not even that. It's like people care about putting food on their table. They care about their kids being safe at school. No one's out here going, oh, I really think we need to cut spending. If there's one thing I care about, it's cutting spending, and it's like that, that conversation in that world is dominated by rich people. I do not think the average person gives a shit about spending. What are you spending it on? Maybe, you should be spending it on bridges and roads and, things that help us here in the United States and not on Ukraine. Fine. But again, the people that care about reining in spending are not everyday Americans.
Conservative, that's something that I can get behind. But what's more important to me is once we get this package and this deal done and completely out of the way, we can move on to the real work, which is the budget and appropriations. That's where we have the real power to actually make changes and help get spending under control for the American people.
In a recent 60 Minutes interview,
for the American people,
you said that this is a spending problem, not a tax problem. And you resisted pushes to, say, tax the wealthy, something that majorities of Americans support.
So good on Bree for pushing this, too, because MTG kind of bills herself as a populist. And Bree's pointing out that, hey, you're so populist, why don't you support fair tax code?
And it didn't seem to really focus on cutting the military budget as a way to bring down cost, despite being a significant critic of the war in Ukraine, et cetera. There's been a significant conversation right now that Tucker has left Fox News about right populism versus left populism. And the differences between them seem to be largely about a willingness to go after elites and the rich on a financial level and do things like cut taxes for the rich and curb military spending. What do you say to folks that wonder why you won't go after elites in those sorts of ways?
Well, all of these are great topics, and I really appreciate you bringing them up. Let me unpack that a little bit because that was quite a few things. Number one, I don't want to cut United States military spending. I want to stop all of the money being spent in the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. I believe that's where the American people can save a lot of money. Ukraine is not a NATO member nation. This was something that President Biden acknowledged from the very beginning. And we should not be defending Ukraine's border while our border is completely out of control. So I would like to see changes there. I strongly support our military, and I want to fund the strongest military in the world, and that being our own military.
When people talk about our border being out of control too, they never talk about the actual cause of people fleeing their countries to come here. So, or the people that enable it. So you never see Marjorie Taylor Greene say, "Oh, we need to attack Walmart. We need to really crack down on Walmart for hiring illegal immigrants." No, we need to build a wall to keep them out. Like that's going to do anything. They can fly over a wall. They can, it's like, there are airplanes, people. Like, most illegal immigrants don't come through the desert on foot. They come through on an airplane and stay on an expired visa. So a lot of these arguments are unserious.
But I don't want to fund a war in Ukraine against nuclear powered Russia. Secondly,
That's good. I agree with her. And by the way, they paint this woman as some kind of dumb hick in the press, dumb racist hick, and she's very well spoken. She's obviously very smart. She's not stupid by any stretch.
We have a spending problem in Washington, D.C. Definitely not a revenue problem. Washington rakes in plenty of money, but the spending is out of control. And again, I blame both parties for that. The federal government is too big, it's overbloated. And as a business owner, that's what I've done most of my life. When you have too much overhead, you have to reel it back in. And that's how you get your company back under control. And we need to do that for our country. The federal government needs to be treated like a successful business, not a business that's on the verge of bankruptcy. Thirdly, for Fox News, one of the biggest media companies in our country, to fire their top guy, Tucker Carlson, I think is a very dangerous sign for America. I think it's an assault on our First Amendment, and I really value a free press. I do. This is something I talk about frequently. And when a media company fires their top guy, the guy that's bringing them in the most money, the most revenue, the most ad dollars.
Well, it's debatable whether he was bringing the most ad dollars, because one of the reasons he was so controversial is because he didn't have advertisers, so he was able to say what he wanted.
It really shows things wrong. And what I believe happened there is Fox News caved to the woke mob, and they were being sued on multiple levels, really in political nature.
This is the mainstream narrative, too, that the people with a very basic understanding of this situation go to, because, and Nick Cruz said this on RBN, this is being used as a cover for what they really fired Tucker for, was being a voice of dissent against the war and against the COVID narratives. I think Tucker's last week, he did two things. And then the January 6th stuff too. Chuck Schumer went on the floor of the House and literally called for Rupert Murdoch to pull Tucker off or to stop Tucker from showing that footage. And I documented that on another video. But the reality is the woke mob. What woke mob took Tucker down? Everyone else at Fox is is against woke people too. The Matt Walshes of the world are mostly at Fox. So they didn't throw him off the air for being anti-woke, even though he kind of towed that line on some issues. Tucker had a lot more of a diversity of opinion though. And the reason they canceled him is because his anti-war And I think Jimmy Dore was right. It's the money. The pharma thing, when he brought on RFK and said bad things about pharma, as much as Tucker would like to believe that Fox doesn't have those types of advertisers, they do. And I'm sure that was probably the final straw for the Murdochs.
And that's the way most conservative Americans see it. There has been a huge backlash against Fox News. Pretty much everyone I know has canceled their Fox News app. They've taken it off their phone. They've canceled their Fox Nation subscription, and they've said they're walking away from Fox News. And
liberals, Tucker Carlson is actually pulling the Republican Party and his viewers in a good direction, like it or not. He's a gun guy. I'm not a gun person. He's I'm not against guns though. People can have them. He's one of those people who was constantly whining about Antifa and actually said at one point that the Democratic Party controls Antifa. Fine. I don't believe that at all. But regardless of all that, he was the only person on the air, talking truthfully about the Ukraine war and the COVID restrictions and January 6th and all that kind of stuff. So,
and I don't blame those Americans one single bit. Tucker Carlson, on his show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, and on his show on Fox Nation, has been covering the news stories that Americans desperately want to hear, because we don't hear them.
Maybe him standing up for those black socialists was the final straw. The ones that they indicted for Russian propaganda. There's a point where Bree's really good in this. She poses a lot of tough questions for Marjorie, but there's one point where she talks about the FBI that I thought was just absolutely fantastic. The perfect question, perfect framing. Bree is not only beautiful but also smart.
The pandemic, when so many people are struggling.
Where is this? Hold on.
Spending in Washington, D.C., and the oversized government that has forced inflation to become
Where is that?
135.
I might be mistaken, but very few politicians actually take that no corporate money pledge. Bernie Sanders was one of them. Despite taking that pledge, managed to.
There's a point where
it's time to make that in. What we need to do is with countries,
the pandemic, when 7% of Americans
play from world. And that's
doing in the state of Florida can point to his huge success.
That representative, which is why there's a question about why conservatives have pushed for the relationship, the ability for people to spend exponentially, frankly, and undermine the one person, one vote principles of our democracy. Decisions like Citizens United have greatly expanded the power of corporations to influence the government. Right now, we're in the middle of a discussion about whether members of the Supreme Court have had undue influence because of informal lobbying efforts, people have argued. So would you support efforts to restrict the amount that corporations can spend in politics?
Well, I'll give you an example. I can only speak for myself.
Bree is good.
I don't take donations from lobbyists. That's something that I decided to do from the beginning. And
that's a non-answer.
I truly believe that each representative, all 435 of us, we really are kind of like lobbyists, or we should be, for the people and the businesses back home in our districts. So I'm very interested in looking at some sort of changes possibly that can be made for lawmakers and to reduce the influence of big corporations on legislation here in Washington, D.C., and make sure that we have the right focus on the American people. But also, I'm a business owner, so I do understand the needs of businesses and their ability to be heard and things that affect their industry here. So I actually see it both ways. But I just want to remind you, I'm not really your average conservative or average conservative Republican, because I complain a lot of times about my party just as much as I do about the Democrat Party.
I like that. I like that post-partisan attitude. And I think she's right. I think the problem with politics right now, too, is people focus too much on the black and white other than the gray. To say that we need to be more fair with the tax code and what businesses do isn't to be anti-business. I think businesses would be smart to, do the type of things that a company like Costco does and pay workers better and reinvest in their employees and really create, rather than looking at these bean counting numbers and trying to drive stock up constantly, really focusing on the long term and investing in that kind of thing, because obviously business is what built this country in a lot of ways. I mean, our industry is what made us the powerhouse that we were. And I think that's fallen in a lot of ways just because there's so many loopholes and it's been taken advantage of in so many different ways. But, obviously Marjorie is a lot more intelligent than people give her credit for.
I appreciate that. But just on that one point, not taking money from lobbyists is one thing. Not taking money from corporate interests is completely another. I might be mistaken, but very few politicians actually take that no corporate money pledge. Bernie Sanders was one of them. Despite taking that pledge, managed to out fundraise everybody else in the Democratic Party. Would you ever consider swearing off all corporate donations, speaking to, as you have done, how pernicious the influence of corporate money is in politics?
Well, I'm really excited to tell you that almost all of my donations are small dollar donors. I think my average donation,
yes, of course they are,
dollars and change here, is somewhere around $35 per person. So I
wanted to give you a chance to respond to Hunter Biden calling for a House Ethics Office investigation into you. What do you have to say about that?
I actually was pretty amused when I learned about this news. It's really interesting that Hunter Biden, the son of the President of the United States, especially I went in the Treasury and read the SARS reports. I've seen what banks were saying about his financial transactions, and I've also read his bank records. And I've seen the wire transfers from China and other foreign countries directly into fake companies. These are LLCs and shell companies that don't produce a product or any kind of service. And then I saw in the bank records where Hunter Biden and many of his other family members got paid directly out of these shell companies, these LLCs. So again, I find it really amusing.
Imagine if that was Trump's kids.
That Hunter Biden is so offended that I would actually talk about that fact, that he and his attorneys had to file a complaint with the House Ethics. But you know what? He's an American citizen, and that is his right to do so. I don't think it's going to have any effect, but I was happy to share his attorney's letter on my congressional Twitter account.
So this right here is why Bree is absolutely fantastic.
Happy to share his attorney's letter.
Listen to this question.
On my congressional Twitter account.
One last question for me, Representative. I actually agreed with you when you called to defund the FBI. The FBI has historically gone over after left-leaning groups, murdering Fred Hampton and the like, and 85% of its budget is actually focused on pursuing left activists, left-leaning individuals. Have you made any moves to actually pursue legislation that would get to the bottom of what your goals are there? Or was it, as many people argued at the time, a kind of performative call that was more linked, from your perspective, to absolving Donald Trump from the kinds of interrogations that were happening against him?
Very good question. Very good question.
No, not performative at all. I really don't have time for anything like that. I didn't come to Washington to be a performer. I came here to make real changes for our country. And it's been a difficult change in my life to do so. But I think these changes are very important. I don't think our nation's law enforcement or Department of Justice should be used as a political weapon. That's the weaponization of government. And that's something that should terrify every single American, no matter how they vote. And again, the Republican Party has the opportunity to make changes in the budget and the appropriations bills that we pass. And that's where I think that we can make changes like that. And I'm going to work very hard in my conference using the power of my voting card to vote for a budget or appropriation bills to be sure that we can hold the FBI accountable and the Department of Justice accountable. And I just think that's the right thing to do.
Okay. if she does that, I made a video recently called Fund the Police with her and AOC rapping. And honestly, Marjorie, that was a great answer. That was a great question, Bree, and a great answer, MTG, because what she said, I don't know if you heard or were paying attention, but she said, hey, we have the power of the purse, we have appropriations, and we're going to take steps to show the FBI when you around, we're going to take your money away. And that's what Congress is supposed to do. They're not supposed to work hand. There's supposed to be a check against that kind of overreach. So I applaud Marjorie Taylor Greene for that answer, and I applaud Bree even more for that question. So they talked a little bit about Tucker Carlson, and I wanted to listen to Dave and Joe here talk about the same thing.
Did you see the Tucker Carlson interview on Full Send? Yes, I saw. I didn't watch the entire thing, but I saw a few clips of it when he's talked about how much he regrets supporting the war in Iraq. That's what you're referring to. Yeah. And I believe him. I think he really means it. I believe him too.
So this is great because just listen.
Sometimes there's people like John McCain types who go like, or Hillary Clinton, they'll admit, okay, there was a mistake, but then they still support every subsequent war after that. And they it doesn't seem, whereas Tucker is like, I'm so ashamed that I supported this. I'll never forgive myself for it. And has opposed every subsequent war after that. And I'm like, okay, I think this guy really believes it.
He's different than people want to pretend he is. First of all, the guy was a deadhead.
Yeah.
You know that? He's the
I did not know this.
So for sure dropped acid.
That'd be my guess.
How else can you enjoy the music?
I think it's legally required that you've taken acid at least once if you're going to enjoy the Grateful Dead. I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't brushed up on the statutes.
Live to LSD, according to my friends who've been there and done that.
It's really interesting what the public perception of Tucker Carlson is, or particularly how polarizing he is to people that it's almost like they're describing a different person than he actually is.
Right.
I really think he was the most interesting person in cable news, the most thoughtful, most intelligent. Like he was really I don't agree with him on anything. On my podcast, we used to do a segment where I had just done it so many times that we started joking about it being a segment that we called Contra Carlson, because I was just disagreeing with him. Like he had all these economic ideas that I completely disagree with. And I disagree with a lot of stuff he said, but he was like such like the lone voice in like really the corporate press who was completely opposed to the military industrial complex, completely opposed to big pharma and all of the COVID insanity. It was really good on like speaking up about a lot of really important issues that you would think like a good leftist would at least appreciate that he's good on that issue, you know? And some of them did. This is what he's the guy who's having Glenn Greenwald on his show. You know what I mean? He's the guy who's having Aaron Mattei and Jimmy Dore.
Yes.
These aren't right wingers. He's having them. A
lot of left wingers.
And it was.
So I wanted to show you that before I go off about your boy Kyle Kulinski, because this whole thing with Tucker, there's a lot of nuance behind it, and Kyle's definitely not digging into any of that nuance. He's definitely hammering the MSNBC partisan line that the media world. So he goes in, Kyle does this bit where he plays this clip of Bill O'Reilly, of all people, drunk and bloated Bill O'Reilly. And you can hear it in his voice that he's drunk and bloated. And just, the stuff you would expect of Bill O'Reilly, the belligerent, dinosaur of Fox past, the ghost of Fox past, if you want to call it that. Tucker has dominated for a long time because he does these dynamic reports, and he has, just like Dave Smith just said, he has people like Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald, people who are doing real reporting. But listen to Kyle's take on the Tucker firing and this whole Bill O'Reilly thing.
Of this channel might not know this, but Bill O'Reilly dominated cable news for a very, very long. He was the number one show for like 20 years. In fact, when he went out, he was the number one show. But I believe it was, what was it? The sexual harassment allegations that got out? No, they came out way earlier.
So even before Me Too, Bill O'Reilly, I think the woman's name was Andrea Macris. And if I remember correctly, Stephen Colbert used to hammer on him about it all the time, but he basically left these dirty voicemails on this girl's voicemail, and she used it to kind of bribe him. He was trying to bang her. And the reality is, later on, Matt Lauer and, Charlie Rose and Harvey Weinstein, everyone else was busted for the same type of behavior at work, because people are, close to who they work with, and people want to fuck. Like, that's how life works. But the fact that Kyle digs up this dinosaur's opinion of what's going on is great. Listen,
there was that whole lying scandal, but I think he survived that for years too, where he was caught telling blatant, brazen lies about, his career as a so-called journalist. But he was ousted when he was number one. He's still definitely sour about that.
Howard Stern used to have this clip of Bill O'Reilly. I should have dug it up. It's so funny. He's like, "We'll do it live. Fuck it, we'll do it live." Let me see if I can find it. I might actually even have it on this computer. Here, I'll look for that while you're listening to Kyle.
That's fact. This is a man who holds a grudge. Well, he went on a show here to discuss Tucker Carlson now being axed from that position. And I love the ornery grandpa vibes here.
Obviously.
He takes these like snide little pot shots and snubs Tucker, but he also gives us some really good insight here as well. So here's Bill O'Reilly, former number one on Fox News, going after the current number one, or recent former number one, Tucker Carlson. Listen to this.
What an incredible news day, John, with Tucker Carlson leaving Fox, gone, and Don Lemon. And joining us now is the mega best-selling author, of course, the host of Common Sense on WABC every night, 9 to 10. And you hear him, of course, on Sid and Friends and elsewhere, the great Bill O'Reilly. Bill, what is your reaction to, earthquakes in the media world today?
Yeah, I'm surprised. 6 years ago this week that I left Fox.
Just listen to his voice.
Plus years. Factor, the dominant cable news program of all time.
Oh, God. Most dominant cable news program of all time.
Not that anybody's counting that I left Fox News when I was the number one most dominant show of all time on air.
He sounds like a pro wrestler. He's like, most dominant show of all time.
But whatever, man. Oh, I love it. Oh, this is wonderful.
For me, for the first 3 years, his ratings were soft.
Media world today.
Yeah, I'm surprised. 6 years ago this week that I left Fox News after 20 plus years doing the O'Reilly Factor, the dominant cable news program of all time. Carlson took over for me. For the first 3 years, his ratings were soft. He lost about 1 million, maybe a little bit more of my audience. And then in 2020, he took a hard right turn. Decided to program for very committed conservative people, whereas I wanted a big tent like WABC wants now. I wanted conservatives, of course, but I wanted liberals and independents to watch me. Carlson basically...
That's hilarious. By the way, he's kind of right. Like, if you go back and watch old Bill O'Reilly shows, and there's plenty of them on YouTube, he does do the tap dance, right? He does I'm not a conservative Republican. Now I'm a registered independent. And if he has on Republican guests, he will ask them tough questions. And every now and then he'll hit you with a position on an issue that's more moderate. But look, by and large, on 95% of issues, Bill O'Reilly is a committed conservative Republican. He votes conservative Republican down the line, but he played the game, right? He did the act. Now, he's right that Tucker caters to the far right, and is like,
no, he is not. Kyle, why are you consulting this dinosaur of a man's opinion instead of Joe Rogan? Or like, you've been on Joe Rogan. I just showed a clip of Dave Smith talking about Tucker Carlson. Have you seen the Full Send podcast, Kyle? Tucker Carlson is not far right. He's not catering to the far right. You just heard Dave Smith say he has more leftists than anyone on cable news. Why is this nuance lost on you, Kyle? Is it because you're hammering talking points for the Democrats? Why are you consulting? Who cares about Bill O'Reilly? Literally, not even conservatives care about Bill O'Reilly. No one was like, hey, I wonder what Bill O'Reilly thinks about Tucker Carlson's firing, except you, Kyle.
like massively contrarian and is kind of conspiracy brained. But Bill does miss the fact that Tucker actually does a similar version to what Bill O'Reilly used to do, which is every now and then on an issue, he'll buck the orthodoxy on the right, you know, and ultimately.
This is also untrue. As Dave Smith just said, since the Iraq War, Tucker Carlson has been against every war, whether Trump supported it. There's also footage of him. He's the one who, this is so wild because a lot of liberals are saying that the reason, and Kyle's saying this actually, that one of the reasons Tucker was fired is because of all these lawsuits that are building, right? Well, one of these lawsuits by this woman is, it says, it's basically saying stuff that is like reality anyway. Like that they had degrading pictures of Nancy Pelosi in a bathing suit in the office. Oh my God, I'm so shocked that they would have some degrading picture of, be joking about Nancy Pelosi. But the other thing was basically one of the things that this woman was complaining about kind of makes it clear that it's not about that. Anyway, let's keep listening to Kyle.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter because he redirects all that energy to support people like Donald Trump, to support standard conservative Republicans. So it's really just posturing more than anything to reach a younger audience. But it worked. So
see, again, this is not true. Kyle will come out here and say, oh, Tucker Carlson has secret texts that say he hates Donald Trump. He was critical of Trump, especially when his administration killed Soleimani. He was critical of Trump's involvement in Syria. Tucker Carlson is not a partisan hack like you are, Kyle, or like Keith Olbermann on the extreme. It's unfair of me to compare Kyle to Keith Olbermann because, let's be honest, he's much more his views are much more up to par with reality than Keith Olbermann, who just screams everyone Russian at everyone from his basement like you're a Russian. Keith Olbermann literally just sits in his basement and screams you're a Russian at everyone. That's his entire broadcast.
So he's sort of discounting a little bit what Tucker's saying, but or what he's doing, but he is also kind of right that I would say the general thrust of Tucker's show is more contrarian, reaching out to the far right.
No, it's not. When did anti-war become a right thing? And again, the other thing is I disagree with Tucker on stuff. I've done pieces about his obsession with Antifa. Tucker actually said that he thought the Democratic Party controls Antifa. And I mean, when you really look into it, Antifa, that version of Antifa anyway, is just cops dressed in black. So at this point in time, they kind of do because they control the government. But that aside, it's Kyle's ignorance on this subject is mind-blowing to me because it has to be intentional, because I think he knows better than this. Like I just showed you, he was on Joe Rogan, so I know he listens to voices outside of his echo chamber. But let's keep going.
And a white nationalist as a top producer that was outed versus.
Okay, another thing, white nationalist is one of those buzzwords that people just use that is to denote racist without any merit whatsoever. So what does that mean? White nationalist. Well, he's a white guy who's a nationalist. What's a nationalist? Someone who believes that probably our money should be spent here in America before we dump it all into Ukraine. Okay, I agree with that. So what has happened is the Frank Luntzes of the world. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's a guy who wrote a book called Words That Work, and he's one of those people who teaches politicians how to use language. So just to give you an example, they used to have this thing called the estate tax, right? And what it was a tax on rich people's estates. It's really whatever, like pay some money. You have the money, rich people. It's like a yacht tax. What Frank Luntz did was he helped these people rename that as the death tax. And now people are against it because it sounds bad. Oh, it's a tax on people that are dead. Oh, that's terrible. Of course I'm against that. Whereas when it's called the estate tax, it sounds like a tax on rich people. So white nationalist is an example of that. Now the Frank Luntzes of the world live in the Democratic Party. So they'll say words like white nationalist as a veiled dog whistle thing to call someone a racist. But what's the reality behind that? Who is that guy really? What do we really know about him? That he's a white nationalist? That's it. It's unserious. I feel bad for you, Kyle.
This is Bill O'Reilly, who maybe did the tap dance a little better. Let's say that. Maybe did the show a little better. Who, me, bro? No, I'm just telling the straight news, bro. Fair and balanced, dog.
Like WABC wants now. I mean, I wanted conservative.
See, what's clear to me is that Kyle hasn't seen the Full Send podcast that Tucker did, nor does he have any idea who Tucker Carlson is. His entire opinion of Tucker Carlson is based on shit he hears from people like Bill O'Reilly, who are completely irrelevant in the modern political discourse.
Conservatives, of course, but I wanted liberals and independents to watch me. Carlson basically programmed for a very hard right audience, and these numbers came up.
No, he did not. The reason he was so popular, the reason he had 3 million viewers a night and a lot of Democrats watched him, is because he was the opposite of that. He was not hard right. He was not someone who just spouted Republican talking points. He had people like Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore, and Kyle knows better. You know better, Kyle. What a sad decline.
Was the second highest.
Kyle's out here citing Bill O'Reilly as a source of valid information on this subject. Come on, Kyle. You know better. Who's a better source on this subject, Dave Smith and Joe Rogan or Bill O'Reilly? You ask yourself that question.
His show Fox next to the 5. But in the past, I'd say 4 or 5 months, his show and every other show on Fox News has lost a considerable amount of.
So I've heard enough of that. Anyway, we don't need to listen to Bill O'Reilly drunk blathering about his beef with Tucker Carlson, a guy who has been irrelevant for 10 years and is still irrelevant. And Kyle's listening to him. It's like the way it works is Kyle is going to, tout Marianne Williamson for the next year and a half. And then eventually Marianne Williamson is going to drop out and they're going to have you vote for this guy.
Let me say this simply and clearly. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by, so you know how we talk about it. Are we the people? Folks, we gotta, it's just, but you gotta, I mean, we gotta reassure, look, my message to everybody I talk to is play the radio, make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone, make sure the kids hear words. I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
Matt Orfalea is an absolute fucking genius. There is none better. So on that note, and talking about Kyle, I wanted you to remember for just a minute how the media treated Bernie Sanders. And Matt Orfalea is an absolute genius. He doesn't need my help, but if you haven't subscribed to him, please do it. He's put this video together and it makes me tear up still almost. Like, it's just, so I'm going to run this as a never forget segment because I don't want people to ever forget what the media did to this movement and Bernie Sanders as a whole, because this was the last chance I think we had at a real shot at changing things for the better and really returning to the roots of the people,
is back, getting into the presidential race. Democrats like somebody new, and that is not going to be Bernie Sanders this time. It's really hard to imagine who the Bernie Sanders at this point. Bernie Sanders, fall back. Please get away from us.
Thank you for doing this.
He has a kind of...
Bernie is back, getting into the presidential race.
Democrats like somebody new, and that is not going to be Bernie Sanders this time.
It's really hard to imagine who the Bernie Sanders voter is at this point.
Bernie Sanders, fall back. Please get away from us.
Senator, great to see you. Thank you for doing this.
He has a kind of gruff, curmudgeon-y side that is, of course, well known. He doesn't actually smile that much.
It's almost like Bernie can't tell the difference between kids and adults.
All right, I think you're dumb. I think you're dumb if you don't sit down and learn how to read and write. No, you were not born stupid. Come here. The only way I think you're dumb, I think when you think you're dumb. Because you're not.
He also, I think you're disheveled, you're unlikable, and you're pushy, and I don't think you should be leading anybody.
How old is too old?
I think the issue is, do you seem like you're in the contemporary world? He's a socialist from the 1950s yelling at people in the same screechy voice, without smiling, without any kind of personal connection. He looked like the angry man in the center of the stage saying, "Get off my lawn." Viva Bernie! And I don't think that's a good look for the Democratic Party.
I see him as sort of a not pro-woman candidate.
You may have heard the term Bernie bro. The Bernie bro, right? Somebody who's a bit younger, whiter, I think, than the overall Democratic primary.
I'm with my magnificent vanilla brother named Bernie Sanders. That's Brother Bernie Sanders we talking about. That's Brother Bernie Sanders we talking about.
Socialism has been a manifest disaster.
Alec would still be here today if I had known that I could come to Canada.
Alex Smith died after trying to ration a vial of insulin when he couldn't afford more.
So his idea about, free health care, he has seen the manifest atrocities that have occurred under socialism.
$1,000 got me 6 months of insulin for my son. That's still less than what I pay a month in the United States.
Gloria Steinem has suggested that younger women are supporting Bernie Sanders so they can meet boys.
Hello, Bernie. We lost our condo, got foreclosed on because of my medical bills.
Like, I don't understand young women who support him.
I trust that Bernie Sanders is going to fight for health care and to lower prescription costs.
Of all the presidential candidates, you're the one that I trust.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. You're just giving us a hug. Thank you. And we got your back.
I think he comes off as mean. I think he's disparaging.
I don't want to overpromise here.
Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl, and I can't even identify for you what exactly it is.
Bernie Sanders has done nothing between 2016 and today.
Thank you for everything you've done these last few years. You've helped to reset our political discourse, and are demanding that we center our politics around justice and equity. I am hopeful because right now, there is a mass movement of people from all over this country, rising up.
Thank you all very much.
It ain't Bernie.
So there you have it, folks. Never forget what they did to Bernie Sanders. Wow. And I mean, you know, you can make arguments now that Bernie just endorsed Biden. Good for him. I mean, I hope he's happy. I hope that I know that in his heart of hearts, he probably thinks he's doing the right thing, trying to, you know, work around the edges like we've always done. But I think at this point, it's kind of like he's in the twilight of his life, and it's not in his DNA to be brave right now. It's not in his DNA to be brave, unlike our next little segment here. One of the bravest men alive. One of the bravest men alive right now, I would say. This man has my utmost respect. Jose Vega. And just watch this.
The lecture hall with Seymour Hersh. I'm looking for the one with Seymour Hersh because it's a policy and press hall event. So shouldn't we be talking about the Nord Stream since that's the biggest story of the century? And you guys
have this bad habit of hitting the space bar. So to give you some context here, he's in a room with the editors for the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Reuters, and he's yelling at them about Seymour Hersh.
You know, I mean, you have the executive editor of the New York Times there who came out with a phony story to try and block Seymour Hersh.
Listen to this. This is great. Like, what I love the most about this clip too, well, not what I love the most, but one of the funniest parts is all the dipshits in the background going like, oh, shut up, a-hole.
Kind of funny how that happened, you know? I mean, did you even acknowledge Seymour Hersh? All of you are executive editors of papers that broke Pentagon, My Lai, Watergate. Is this the same papers or not? I mean, is there anything you've gotten right in the last 20 years, or am I mistaken about that? I mean, it's just kind of...
He's just like roasting these people live. It's beautiful.
Funny because Iraq, wrong. Syria, wrong. Russiagate, really wrong. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. So the last thing you could do to try and actually fix your reputation is acknowledge that through leaks, we had to find out
like,
that Zelensky was going to bomb Moscow on the anniversary. I mean, if you're so impartial, shouldn't you at least say, right, that Zelensky was going to bring us on the verge of World War III? That seems pretty fair. While Julian Assange rots in prison, all of you got, you know, fat checks because he's in jail for doing your job. And you know what? Tucker Carlson ain't no Seymour Hersh. But he did something you guys are scared to do. Speak the truth and actually be critical of the war, which is why he was actually fired from Fox.
Right.
Because you
that Dominion shit is cover.
and actually have any relevancy. And you know what? The mainstream press is now dying. Nobody's ever going to listen to you again. You have no credibility with the public. The only people who care about what you have to say are elite assholes who have nothing productive to say anymore, and it's dying off. So will you at least say something, either about Nord Stream or Ukraine?
This man has gigantic balls.
And the only reason we knew about that was through leaks? Go ahead. It's a free speech event, right? You guys are the press. Let's say something here. Mr. Khan, come on. You know, you're the executive editor of the New York Times, you know? I'm just trying to get into some good trouble here, man. Woo, listen, Karen, get out of my face for a second. I got to talk to these gentlemen. Okay. Well, I just want to hear what they have to say. Go ahead. I'm done. You know, that's on to you. Go.
Wait your turn.
You could project if we can.
Hear everybody's question.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right.
I do think that we need to give our moderator a chance to ask other questions.
We're on the verge of World War III.
Let's go. Really?
Let's go. Say something about this bombing. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Listen, don't stand there while there are people rotting in prison. Nobody said anything about Uhuru, right? The socialists who are in jail for being critical of this war. God damn it. Please say something about people in jail for being critical of this war. They don't.
People are clapping because they're dragging him out. So I wanted to remind you of this incident a few years ago, and this is one of the reasons I think Jose is so friggin' brave, man. Because this is what it could look like, right?
First and foremost, thank you for your time. You spent a lot of time talking to us here today. Thank you for coming and being open and honest. You recommended a book to us earlier. I wanted to recommend a book to you. It's called Our Madhouse by Greg Glass. Yeah, he's the top investigative journalist in America. I've already read it. And he said you won the 2004 election. Isn't that
Kerry goes, I've already read it. This is John Kerry, by the way, in 2004.
2004? There were multiple reports.
So actually, it's not in 2004, probably 2005 or 6.
The election of disenfranchised black voters in Florida and Ohio. So what's the question? Well, that's my question. He's been talking for 2 hours.
The difference between this and Jose was a lot more aggressive than this guy. This guy actually got called on and to ask a question.
Four people in that. So there are multiple reports of disenfranchisement of black voters on the day of the election in 2004. There was also voting machines, electronic voting machines in Houston County, Florida, that counted backwards. So amidst all these reports of phony, bogus stuff going on, how could you concede the election on the day?
People are clapping.
This book, it's about 5 million books that express that you won the election. Did you want to be president? I'm not even done yet. I have 2 more questions. If you were so against Iran, how are you saying, let's impeach Bush now? Impeach Bush now before you can invade Iran. Like, for what? Impeach Bush, right? Also, remember.
This guy is nailing it. And watch what triggers the police.
Stolen rooms from Collins and Bush. Were you in the same secret society? That's all right. Let me answer your question.
Cell phones were just becoming prominent back in this time, so the video isn't great, but it's the exact same situation almost.
What did I do? What did I do?
This kid's going off.
You know, unfortunately, he's not available to come up here and swear me in as president.
Why are you arresting me? Someone do it.
Terry's out there making jokes. Unfortunately, he's not available to come and swear me in as president. And Kerry is the Secretary of Defense now or something? Like he was a good dog and got his treat.
What did I do? Get off! You know what? Get the man. I didn't do anything. Don't take me, bro. Don't take me.
Now, I think that kid's being a little bit dramatic. I couldn't see Jose doing that. That kid's like a white suburban kid who's probably never felt pain in his life. So being tased like that is like, he's like, wow, this is insane. Whereas someone like Jose, who's like lived in the hood, like he's probably had a lot worse than tase. So I think that's probably part of what gives him. I just wanted to draw that parallel because it takes crazy courage to do the shit Jose's doing, and that's courage that I know I don't have right now. I mean, I got the heart to back it up, but I'm not out there looking to get into those kind of violent disagreements with people in public, but I feel like they need to be happening, and I'm glad that someone like Jose is out there doing it, and so props to him from the deepest depths of my soul for going out and being that voice right now, because it's so necessary. We're walking like zombies towards another war without a second thought, man, and it's crazy. All you got to do is put a Democrat in charge and suddenly war's awesome. People are nutty. So before we close out, I just wanted to show you this last bit of footage. Maybe there is some hope. So watch this. Recently, Sagar from Breaking Points did kind of a cut down of what's going on with the lab leak theory for COVID. And I thought his piece here was very well done, so I wanted to share it with y'all.
All right, Sagar, what are you looking at? So much of the hype around cable news and its hopeful demise given recent events is a reminder of why their demise is so important. Because their active propaganda worked to keep half the country keep it dumber, less informed during some of the most critical times in modern American history. Now, as I've always said, what cable news chooses not to show you is far more important than what they do show you. Selection bias is half the battle, as anyone who's ever looked at any scientific research actually knows. Perhaps no area of this was more glaring than that of the lab leak theory. I know it has been years now at this point, but I cannot believe that a single cable news channel outside of Fox, which only told about 1/25 of the story, is ignoring this new report from the Senate Health Committee, which, in my opinion, basically solves once and for all the question of whether COVID leaked from the lab. This 302-page report, which has been in the works for almost 2 years, was made public a few days ago. The details compiled together are absolutely damning. I encourage you all to go read it for yourself. Let's make our way through the report and the most important new details. Number one, an epidemiological look at COVID and its emergence in the city of Wuhan sometime in late October 2019. According to China's own data that it provided the WHO and a new review, a large spike of, quote, adult-like influenza symptoms began spreading across the city in November 2019. The spike was accompanied by negative tests internally for any known type of said influenza, despite thousands of cases spreading across the city and all of China. The committee gained access to unpublished reports inside China, which show official Chinese CDC records, who even identify a person in Hubei province contracting confirmed COVID November 17, 2019, weeks before China.
So, two comments here. First of all, is there anything we don't outsource to China, even disease experiments? And second of all, I think the reason that this information is allowed to come out now is because they're beating the drums for war with China. Anyway, keep listening.
China warned the world about COVID and, of course, shows deception from day one. More so, the committee dedicated major resources to looking at a natural origin hypothesis of COVID and systematically dismantling any credibility for it. The committee notes that in almost every single recent natural zoonotic spillover, there has been evidence left behind in animal samples to see the exact evolution of the disease. That includes the original SARS virus, which showed a clear and incredible jump from a palm civet cat over to an intermediate species to humans. And if the wet market theory were true, scientists would have to show not only the prevalence of COVID in animals at the market or samples, but they would have to show how COVID got there and how it morphed right from there to humans. The committee notes that China's CDC shows it collected 1,380 samples from the Wuhan Met Market in 2020, so well after COVID was swamping the entire city of Wuhan. And even then, not one sample from that market tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. In fact, the only...
So what they're basically saying is the idea that it came from an animal has been proven beyond a doubt to be false, because if it had, there would be other animals. They would have found animals infected with it, and they didn't.
Traces of SARS-CoV-2 that was found at the market were the exact same strain found in humans at the time, indicating it was the humans who brought the virus to the market, not vice versa. It's important to establish a few things. One, we know all of this. This COVID was all over Wuhan by mid-November. Not just Wuhan cases, all over China. Second, even samples from the lab wet market months after the spread didn't even show COVID inside of these animals. Ergo, we can say with confidence the timeline from China and its theory of spread, absolutely wrong, not correct. So then, what about the lab? Here we will tread again on obvious ground. The Wuhan lab was cited for safety violations in 2018 by an internal U.S. Department of State cable, and actually the committee found a warning from March of 2019. Listen to this. China's own CDC director, who warned this, March 2019. Quote, a potential major risk stems from stocks of concentrated infectious pathogens stored in laboratories and the absence of adequate biosecurity measures. Non-compliance of approved biocontainment and biosafety protocols could result in the accidental or deliberate release of pathogens in the environment. Genetic modification of pathogens, which may expand host range as well as increase transmission and virulence, may result in new risks for epidemics, specifically synthetic bat origin SARS-like coronaviruses acquired an increased capability to infect human cells. So yes, you heard that correctly. Months before COVID leaked from the lab, China's own CDC director warned of a potential lab leak for genetically modified bat coronaviruses, which had the ability to infect human cells. Worse, the committee's review found the Wuhan lab was conducting years-long research on genetically enhanced bat coronaviruses with an inappropriate level of safety at the lab, violating U.S. guidelines for the way it should have been done here, and raising questions again as to why Dr. Fauci and the EcoHealth Alliance were funding it in the first place.
So, with that in mind, it's pretty clear that what was going on was funded by the U.S. And like I said, it's pretty obvious that a lot of the reason this is allowed to come out now is because of the war drum beating with China. But I wanted you to see this last bit of footage before we cut out, where Rand Paul is basically arguing with Sam Power from USAID about wanting to see documentation about this. I mean, so now you know that it's been proven beyond a doubt that this disease started in a lab in Wuhan. Watch this. Watch this clip right here.
Senator Paul. Ms. Powers, did USAID fund coronavirus research in Wuhan, China?
We did not fund gain of function
That's
research,
not the
as
question.
you know.
The question is, did you fund coronavirus research in Wuhan, China?
Before my time, there was the PREDICT program with which you're familiar, which ended in China in 2019.
Yeah, this is a $200 million program, and the GAO has also identified that some of these grants went directly to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where there is a suspicion that the lab leak began the pandemic. Has USAID awarded funds to the Academy of Military Medical Sciences in China?
Not to my knowledge, but I'd have to give.
I think the answer is once again yes. GAO has found that there have been subawards of NIH money, as probably as well as USAID money, that went to the Academy of not just medical research, military medical research in China. Now, part of the evidence here is we can't get the records to look at this. So I've been asking for months and months for records. In September of last year, I wrote Ms. Powers, USAID, a request asking for records from the PREDICT program. These are not classified. These are simply records of scientific research. And we want to read the grants to find out what they were doing and whether the research was dangerous or not. The response I got from your agency was USAID will not be providing any documents at this time.
So knowing what we just watched there with Sagar, this is definitely squeaky stuff after what we just saw with Sagar here. So let's keep watching.
They're just unwilling to give documents on scientific grant proposal. We're paying for it. They're asking for $705 million more in money and we get no response. So 2 weeks ago, the ranking member, Risch, myself, and 25 other Republican senators, unfortunately, so far, signed a letter once again. It's still no response. We're not asking for classified information. We're not asking for anything unusual. 20 million people died around the world. You're supposed to be an agency that cares about the death of people around the world. We, talk about starvation and famine, and 20 million people died from a virus, and you won't give us the basic information about what grants you're funding around the world and who you're funding. Should we be funding the Academy of Military Medical Research in China? They're now off limits. But did we fund them? And who was making the decision? You know who ran the PREDICT program? UC Davis. Have you had any conversations with UC Davis about research in China and whether it was advisable?
So again, to set the record straight, first of all, the PREDICT program ended in 2019. We have people,
and yet it goes on in other forums and other names.
That's certainly not USAID program.
Well, you have a program called Emergency Pandemic Threats Program still, don't you?
Rand Paul has done his homework.
In response to the first set of allegations, we have provided hundreds of pages of documents related to the PREDICT program for the very reason that you say, because we are involved.
Not to us.
We are, again, as I know you had an exchange with Secretary Blinken as well, consistent with longstanding practice.
Not going to give them to us.
Responsive to the committees of jurisdiction.
Not going to, you've been consistent in not giving us any information.
That's not true.
So, as you can see, her level of obfuscation there is very interesting. And I think what I'm going to do next, before we kind of close out for the day, is go into conspiracy theory territory here with you. So prepare yourself for the unknown. Okay, so when it comes to COVID, right, there is this obvious now visible lab leaked virus preceding the 2020 election, right? And it forces us all to be locked down at home. and we have to vote by mail. It's much more difficult to do, exit polling when most people are voting by mail. So it's hard to verify, and I'm not making any claims. I don't know what happened. I'm not trying to get my channel banned. But that's just the reality. So on that note, Bill Maher, before the election, said he supported there being a economic tanking to get rid of Trump. So listen to this.
The economy, because this economy is going pretty well. We have to, what? Why is that funny? It is going well for now. For now, right. That's my, thank you. That's my question. I feel like the bottom has to fall out at some point. And by the way, I'm hoping for it, because I think one way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy. Yeah. So please bring on the recession. Yeah. Sorry if that hurts people, but it's either root for a recession or you lose your democracy. Trump is doing everything you could possibly do to screw up the economy. It's like everything's going great. Yes. And this is the great thing. You watch Trump's rhetoric. He stands up there and says, lowest unemployment ever. African Americans doing great. We're all doing fantastic. Best ever. But also, we're a disaster. We got to change everything. Right. America's getting robbed blind by the foreigners. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Oh, we have a good economy or a bad economy? If we have a good economy, why not just let it ride? If we have a bad economy, we'll have another conversation. But he's making no sense. But then, of course, that is the refrain of the Trump administration. If you look.
So I thought that was So I thought that was an interesting piece of video. And what that John Heilman guy says at the end, in retrospect, it's pretty obvious that the media narrative around Trump was completely manufactured. And, a lot of the things that he said were taken out of context by the press when you actually heard them in context and so on and so forth. You get the idea. But when you piece all this COVID stuff together, it's easy you go, oh, that's interesting. And I'm not making any assumptions. I'm not saying anything directly. I'm just showing you these three pieces of tape together. So the Rand Paul or the, Sager's breakdown of the lab leak being confirmed, and then Rand Paul questioning Samantha Power about it and her kind of being dodgy. And then Bill Maher saying, we need to tank the economy because it's going pretty good to get rid of Trump. And, maybe there's something there. Probably not, obviously, but it's interesting to think about, isn't it? Anyway, I'll leave you with that. I hope you're doing well out there. Take good care of yourselves.